Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing really well today. Thank you so much for coming to today's broadcast. The title of our broadcast today is Ask the XPages Experts. My name is Courtney. I'm the marketing manager at Team Studio and your co-host today. I'm joined by my co-hosts Howard Greenberg and Paul Delanebbia from TLCC, and today's speakers and XPages experts, David Leedy, Mike McGarrell, and Nathan Freeman. Unfortunately, Jesse Gallagher isn't able to join us today, but our panel is ready to take on your questions. Thank you, David, Mike, and Nathan for taking time out of your day to speak on this webinar. I'll be taking a few moments right now to cover some housekeeping items and tell those of you who aren't familiar with Team Studio who we are. Then I'll pass the baton to Howard so he can give an intro, and we'll dive into today's topic. Each of our experts will get us started with a short presentation, then we'll dedicate the rest of the time to answering your questions. David will be presenting on how to improve users' time to first byte. Mike will talk about building on properties, and Nathan will talk about how to extend Domino access services to build more usable REST models for your own data. So the housekeeping items. The attendee list is private. All attendees are muted during this session, so you can participate by typing your questions for David, Mike, and Nathan inside the question section on your GoToWebinar window. There's a picture on your screen here to help you find where this is. And Howard will show it again later just for help. We're doing Q&A after the speaker's short presentations, but you're welcome to ask your question at any point in the question section, and we'll get to it once these presentations have concluded. This session is being recorded, and the links for the recording and the slides will be sent to you in a follow-up email in a few days. If you want to review anything or rewatch the broadcast, feel free to do that. So a little bit about Team Studio for those who aren't familiar with us. We've delivered Notes and Domino developer and admin tools to the community since 1996. We moved into the mobile application arena in 2010 with our award-winning mobile application platform, Unplugged, and we also offer professional services to help mobilize and modernize applications. The Notes tools are our suite of 10 tools for Notes developers and admins. They help with tasks such as source code control and build automation. Unplugged provides the ability to extend Notes apps out to mobile devices, and these apps have the capability to function when users are offline. We also provide template apps like Team Studio Continuity for mobile business continuity, OneView for approvals, and Customer View for mobile CRM. We launched the X-Controls project at the end of 2014. This project allows developers to quickly create XPages applications by dragging and dropping custom controls into their XPages. The applications developers create will work on desktop browsers, mobile browsers, and Team Studio Unplugged. You can learn more on Team Studio's website. And lastly, Team Studio offers professional services such as the Developer Assistance Program, Application Upgrade Analysis, and Application Usage Auditing. Okay, switching gears. This is going to be a very interactive webinar, and I'd like to get us started by asking a quick poll question. So give me 1 second to get this started. Okay, you should be seeing a poll question now. How long have you been working with XPages? More than 4 years, 3 to 4 years, maybe 1 to 2, maybe less than a year, or maybe you haven't started yet. Okay, the results are coming in. Looks like 84% of you have voted, and it's slowing down, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results with you. So it looks like the winner here is a tie between 1 and 2 years and 3 and 4 years. 23% of you have been working with XPages for more than 4 years, and then 9% less than a year, and 8% of you on this webinar today haven't started yet. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. Now I'd like to introduce IBM champion Howard Greenberg from TLCC. Over to you, Howard. Let me give you presentation rights here.
Okay, well, thanks, Courtney, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is, as Courtney said, Howard Greenberg, and I'm one of your co-hosts today, along with my partner, Paul Delanevia, who I'll show you his great picture in a second here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome today.
Okay, so a little bit about TLCC before we get started. I'm sure many of you are familiar with us. We've been around since 1997, I think it is, 20 years almost. We specialize in Notes and Domino and XPages training and consulting. So our courses are self-paced courses that you take via the Domino Designer or Domino Administrator client. And we have courses on not only XPages, which is a full line of XPages courses, including Java courses, but we also have courses on administration and then core Notes and Domino, things like Lotus Script and stuff like that. And we also have a user course. Our best-selling courses are our free demo courses. If you have not started with XPages, I think there's 8% of you who have not started. We have a free introduction to XPages course. That's a great 2-3 hour introduction to kind of tell you what some things are about, get you started. We also do mentoring here at TLCC, so we can work with you as you transition from what you learned in our courses to your real-world applications. And we can also do private classes, either virtually or come on site. And last but not least, Paul and I also do development as well. Upcoming webinars that we have coming up. This actually is not going to be solely an XPages topic. Actually, Theo Hesselman, who's many of you in Europe probably know, he runs the Engage conference. He's going to do a talk on all the different frameworks you can use in your web applications that will also work well on mobile. And he's going to show that using traditional Domino design elements, but these frameworks can all be adapted to XPages. So kind of, I sat in on this session Theo did last year at Connect, and it's a great introduction to some of these frameworks and compare and contrast them and see what's available and see what you might want to use in your application, whether it's a Notes and Domino, traditional Domino web development, or an XPages app, or maybe even just something that's not even in the Domino platform. So the URL's there. We'll have a link to register in a day or two. Also, all our old webinars are available. If you go to that link, you'll see a link to our recorded webinars. We have a couple years worth of webinars. All of them are on YouTube, and all the slides and demo databases are available. So asking questions, in all the questions you can, hopefully you'll be asking a lot of questions today. That's the whole idea today. And all the questions you'll ask in the GoToWebinar interface, there's a pane for questions. If you don't see it, there's a little orange arrow pointing to the left. Click on that, it'll expand the interface, and you'll see a questions pane. And you put your question in there. And when our presenters are done doing their short topics they're going to cover, we will answer your questions verbally. So that's the way we're going to ask the questions today. Word of caution, I should say, any questions you have on XPages are welcome. If we can answer them, the panel, we have some really expert folks today, so I'm sure they can tackle your questions. But don't ask us questions like, when is IBM going to do blah, blah, blah? Because we're not from IBM. We don't know. And we probably would like to know the answer to that, too. So keep your questions related to XPages and related to topics about the current product, not about anything future that IBM could do or anything outside of the XPages realm. Okay, your presenters today, first up, we're going to have Mike McGarrell, and Mike's going to talk about the properties class. And unfortunately, Jesse couldn't make it today, but then we'll go on to David and Nathan. So Mike, we're going to switch controls over to you. I'll make you the presenter.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Vaccaro. Thank you. I'm going to talk about properties, custom properties for both custom controls and that's XPages themselves. I work for a private company called Zarnowski Display Service. We do trade show, everything related to trade shows, design booths, store them, ship them, and everything. And so I'm going to talk about, like I mentioned, the custom controls, where the properties within a single custom control and how effective they are and how powerful they are when you use them with multiple controls. That's where it's where it comes in really handy. And then I'm also going to talk about two applications, two different ways to use them on an X page, two samples. One would be a side menu, another one would be a breadcrumb navigation across the top of the page. So, for example, this page here, I got on this page I want to show these red properties, and this is how I built this particular page with the properties. On the custom control, that for the page, the section with the red properties is a repeat, and within a custom control, and within that custom control, I have a property called squares color, and this is going to be a string property, and that is based on, and it's going to get one of these three values. I'm going to put in there red, green, or blue. In sample, I was showing red, of course, and then in the other property is a Java object, which is one of my favorites because it allows a lot of flexibility. Some other options would be an int, a boolean, or a date in there, but in this case I'm picking Java object, and I'm going to my Java class, I'm calling squares, and I'm getting a particular list. And you can see here I'm getting this red list with the names of the properties. So then, within the custom control itself, so within the repeat, you see this for the value that I'm using the square list. It gives me the squares list. It gives me the three names. Then within the style class for the section called square, I'm adding that color. So I'm adding red. So the class becomes square top and red together. Then I have the rest of the text. And the way to reference the property is to use composite data. And there's a sample there. And what that does, it gives you a built-in property map, and it automatically has the getters and setters in there. So you could just use expression language to get to the value. And in the actual X page, this is a sample of this custom control called CC squares with the two properties, and this is the way it looks on the X page within the source. And again, that gives you this page here with the three properties. Now, I'm also going, next I'm going to show a combination of custom controls, and I'm going to get my values from a class I'm calling multiple. And so instead of hard coding the names in there, I'm going to get them from a Java class. So in this case, the values are hard coded, but you could set up a configuration document and get the values from that way if you wanted. So then, and inside the source, I have this. This one's called CC Squares Advanced. But it's the same custom control. So I'm using the great flexibility of custom controls to just repeat them, use the same one on a page, and within the keeping the same squares list, but this time I have a style name property that's also an object, and I'm getting the value from the multiples class, which I'm loading in the before page load event on top, and I'm getting it 3 different ways, and there's 3 equal ways here. The first way is with expression language, with the dot notation. The second way there is expression language, but with square bracket notation. So instead of the dot with the name of the value, the dot with the name of the property I want to get, instead I get the, I'm using a string to generate that. And that's really good because instead of hard-coded string, you could also compute that string. And the last one I'm using is just server-side JavaScript as a sample with that, just to show you that that's available. And then this gives me the different multiple properties here. So that's the repeat on there. Now for the actual X page, I want to talk about the menu on the left. One sample is that on this page, the word multiple is highlighted because I'm on the multiple page. And the way I did that is within the source, I added a property to the actual X page. And that's the way to get to that. You got to get to the All Properties pane, and then you add a parameter. So you hit the plus sign, and you put in name and a value. Then you end up with the source that is on top. And within the menu, that's a custom control, I have each of those buttons is a link, and each of those has a formula that looks for the word multiple in that property from the menu key. That's the way I'm calling it. So if it has it, it returns a style class of active, and if it doesn't have it, it doesn't have the active in there, but then it creates a link. So I could go to the next, to go to a different page. Now I'm going to show a sample of the properties with navigation across the top. So I have page 1 here. I'm on the home page. Then I move, if I click on the blue button, then I see the blue properties, and the blue properties have links. If I click on the middle one, Vermont, it goes to the Vermont page. And so the navigation shows across the top. And I'm doing that in a similar way, where I'm adding parameters, just like I did in the other page, on here. So I have a page key and a category key. Then my top level navigation up there, it has, I have formulas in there that look for the same sort of, look for the properties with the right names, and then display the links based on the values in the properties. So whether whether something's rendered in different style classes. So that's the 2 links there. Okay, and that's it for me.
Thanks, Mike. All right, David, give me 1 second and I'll pass it over to you.
Sure. All right. So my name's David Leedy. I work with Mike at Zarnowski, and I don't have too much of an introduction of myself because I don't really care. So I do this little screencast called notes9.com, and if you haven't seen or heard about that, it's basically just a lot of video tips and tutorials and XPages that I do, and I try to rope in as many people as I can to do topics that I can't do. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. It is on YouTube, but and a lot of people seem to be going to YouTube a lot, but go to the blog because there's some other stuff from there. I also have a couple other websites that I've just started kind of really trying to attack. XPages TV, if you go there now, that's just a very simple list of every show that's of interest that's been done. And there are some cheat sheets available on xpagescheatsheet.com. Most recently for the community, Jesse Gallagher and I got together and we made it an XPages Slack. Oops, I don't want that. Development chat. And I'm going to actually show you what that looks like. So what is this? This is people talking. It's people talking about XPages, and you can be one of those people if you want to be. So the great Declan Lynch just came on and did an auto invite business, which I've updated in my blog. So if you go to this link here, and it's on a recent Notes 9 post too, because I know this is kind of long. I should make a shortener for that. But you can just get auto invited to that, and you can come in and you can talk XPages with us. So that's my little community spiel there. So my good friend Jesse, who's unable to talk to us, his topic was page controllers and MVC style programming, something that I'm a big fan of also. So I'm going to very briefly kind of give you a high level discussion on that, and then I'm going to talk about what I came here to talk about. And like my buddy Mike, I don't have really slides because he's more professional than I am. I just have code, so we're going to look at that. So when it comes to page controllers, and let me just close all this stuff here. And I have done this on a recent Notes of 9, and really several of them. Jesse Gallagher has a great framework that you can install either via library, or you can rip out the needed bits if you don't want to use a library, and get it into your app, and it makes life a lot easier. I have a little app that I just did on, I think, Notes 9 182, which has no dependencies, so it's not using his framework, but it's using the concept of a page controller. And what that is, and this is what the app kind of looks like. And if we just take a quick peek at this new project, we can put stuff in here, whatever, we can save it. And I haven't actually tested this in a while, so I'm glad it works. If I go into one that does exist, we can do a new task, so we have the unlimited line item business going on that everyone loves and stuff like that. So how does this work? It looks like any app. This could be server-side JavaScript from looking at it. It could be Java. So how does this work behind the scenes? Well, it is in Java, and one of the main reasons to use Java, in my opinion, these days, is because of the page controller concepts. So if I look at this project page, so there's actually kind of a lot going on here. Right? You know, we've got this, this repeat control, we've got this dialog box, we've got all these fields and all that. And if we look at the source code for all this stuff, you're not going to see much code. You're just seeing the fields. You're not really seeing much in the way of server-side JavaScript. Okay, there's a little bit here. But it's really calling the page controller, which I probably renamed stupidly here as project control, but it's calling the page controller to do all its work. So what that gives you, it gives you a very nice, clean XPage that really only has what it needs to, and this gets into the MVC or the model view controller stuff. So if we look at the code behind the scenes, I have two objects of interest kind of here. I've got a Java object that is, I believe this is called the model in the model view controller. I never really got into those terms or so, but this is my pure interaction with the database, and I make this object to replace my need to talk to the notes document itself. So what this guy does, and I am using the OpenNTF API, which is a great project, and I highly recommend it, but it is not a requirement to get into the page controller business. It's only a requirement if you want to make life easier for you. So what this object does is this will load from a document from the database, and it will save a document from the database. And where's my little outline over here, just so we can see the things. And that is the length of my interaction with the actual database, right? So everything else, these fields and stuff like that, and if I want methods, get all tasks or so, that's done through the object itself. Now, of course, that's going to hit the database itself, but I'm not holding on to this project document. So this object knows what to do. It's similar it's like getting into building your own API, like the notes database or the notes document that's given to us. This is my own version of a project document, and I can, here's a refresh method, here's a create method. I can do anything I want. So this is clean. This just has the object level data. But now there is stuff that needs to happen on this XPage, and that's what this class over here that I'm calling controller project is doing. And what this will do is this will control read only, because if you notice, I'm in read mode until I hit the edit button, and then I can close, or I can save, or I can reduce edit button. So all the functionality on that page, I'd start with this little page knit thing, etc., is done on here. So I don't need to, pollute my XPage with all these view scope variables or things like that. I can make any kind of thing that you would do with a view scope. I would make it as a method into this page controller. Okay, and it's a great way to work. And I believe this is called the view in the model view controller. I'm not 100% sure. And what you can do with this, and I wanted to whip up an example, but I only found out about Jesse not being here too late for me to do it, is you can extend this. So this project extends this base. Okay, now what do I have in this base? Well, not much. I've got a method that does print. So I don't have to type this out all the time or use the Eclipse shortcut. I can do this .print and get a message to the console. Now that will be available in any page controller I create. I've got a little helper to get the parameter and stuff like that. But I've created applications where I've got like a nav bar, you know, in the bottom, you know, like, so here's a button, here's a button, here's a button, and I go to 3 different pages or so, but they're all based on the same kind of controller. So it makes creating these your navigation through your application a lot easier. So okay, that's just a quick high-level overview to the page controllers. I highly recommend this as a best practice for a pure XPages application to separate your page control code, the code that you use on your page itself. Get as much as possible, get that into a Java class to do that control, and then create your own API with your objects. And again, there's a lot of episodes on Notes and 9 if you want further information on that. Okay, now moving on to what I wanted to talk about today. We have, and let's go to XSnippets. And if you're not aware of this, OpenNTF, our great community site that we all love, has in addition to full projects, it has all these snippets on here. And inside this favorite, you know, and popular area is a really good one, this standby dialog custom control. So you drop this custom control on, and you get a nice kind of like loading or wait screen during partial refreshes. So let's kind of look at that for a minute. I'm going to just refresh this page, and I'm going to just hit this, and hopefully the time should have changed because that should take a little while to run. Okay, well maybe I messed that up, but that wasn't even the good page anyway. But the better page is the page 2, where if we do this now, see how we get this, you know, loading thing. And I've got just a long counter wait here for a couple of seconds, so it's probably too long now that I sit here waiting through it. Okay, and that's done. So if you actually have a long-running process on your page, it's good to have something like that. Okay, now let me close this and catch up to that. So how do we do that? So I have this custom control, XPage, I call it CC Standby, and all I simply did was I pasted it directly in to from OpenNTF. Okay, so it's free, it's done, it is really good. And then on the page itself, page 2, now I've got no controllers or any business in this little app or so. I have this little button that says do something, and if we look at the event, it does waste time, and count does just a big loop, and then I do this partial refresh, and just by including this on my page, it's going to catch this or any partial refresh and then give you that nice little loading screen. Okay, and that's all said and good until it doesn't work. And I did actually have a problem with this custom control in iOS 9 on an iPad app. What iOS 9 was doing is when that would kick off, it would actually zoom in on the browser, do something weird. So I assume that's an Apple bug, but I did abandon it in one app for that, and I went to a more targeted solution. Okay, so if we look here at page 3, I did something a little different here. And now this does not have the wait. So it has the standby control, but what this is doing, this is going out to my fake names database and just doing a big calculation to count of states. So I've got just thousands of records, and it's, again, this is ugly, I know, but you know, there's 44 people in Colorado, 316 in California. But if you look at this from a user perspective, if you want to go to this page, and let's do it from here, they're waiting. They're waiting. They don't see anything. So the time to first byte of your page is rather long. So ideally, if you have to run a process, this is going to take a couple seconds. You want to get them, and I don't really have a good UI, but you want to get them this quicker than that, so they're just not waiting in limbo. So if we go to page 4 and do that, okay, it's still doing the exact same calculation. It feels a little faster though because I got that framework in here, and again, there should be a nav bar and all that good stuff, but I've got the core layout of my page in here almost instantly, right? Or actually instantly. So let's see the difference between page 3 and page 4. What I'm doing in page 3, and again, there's no controller crap in here, is
okay. Well, then briefly, the OpenNTF one failed for me on an iOS 9 thing, which could very well be an Apple bug or so, but that made me really want to look at the targeted approach rather than just throwing this on and letting it take care of everything. So when I build a page that I know is going to take a little bit to tabulate some data or so, quite honestly, previously I would do it in the before page load event, and what that ends up doing is it takes you have to calculate all that data before the page loads. So if we started on a different screen here just to show you here. So you're waiting, your screen hasn't changed, you're waiting, and that's not a good user experience. So if you are going to make them wait to get the data, which sometimes it's unavoidable, or so, at least give them your app first and give them a nice little message up here. So the way you do that is, if we go to page 4, is you can add, and there's this great post, I had it in the slide, and it's right here, this XPages ERA blog spot thing. So just Google Ajax loading control and XPages, and you'll get there. If you add these 2 modules to it, then you can use this targeted Ajax loading control. And it doesn't have to be a message. You can hide or show a div in place of that message in case you want your own graphic, things of that nature. So what you do then is in my before page load, I'm setting a view scope variable that says the main content area is false. So don't even render this main content area. So that gets me my page really quickly, okay? And then when it's done there, the last thing that really runs is this on-client load. In the on-client load then, I'm calling my data gathering function, whatever it is, and this could be a page control, I'm just not using that here. I'm calling this function get state totals. And if we come back here to the get state totals, this gathers all my data and does all the work, and I've got a little counter in here to slow it down and stuff like that. But then it's putting the data into the view scope so I can reach it. But it's also now saying that I actually have data. So that main content panel, let's set that rendering to true. So after that data is provided, it sets this to true, and then the page will render this main content panel. So you get a much overall better look and experience to the user that they at least get your nav bar and your sidebar and your outer lane framework, if it was a good app, you'd have that. And then they just see this nice message while they're waiting. So that's what I really wanted to come to this webinar with is the ability to target special things and kind of lazy load your data in a way that you get the UI bits there first, because it feels quicker even though it takes the exact same amount of time.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I'm Nathan Freeman, co-founder at Red Pill Now, and I'm going to talk today about how to extend the DDS REST service that ships with the extension library. So a few fundamentals. For those who don't know, if you're just crawling out from under that rock and you haven't heard of REST services before, REST is short for representational state transfer. And it's just a really simple way to have clients talk to web servers, and it's typically done over HTTP, just like all other web traffic. But instead of getting things like HTML markup when you make a request to the URL, you typically get a JSON-based or sometimes an XML-based response. And the key thing about them is that they're stateless. So all the information that you need in order to understand what to return comes in the request and comes in the form of specific routes in the URL, or query parameters that are included in the URL, or header extensions that are included in the request. So why would you want to use REST? Well, the biggest reason is that it's much faster. It's much faster than XPages, it's much faster than classic Domino. It's the fastest way to get that communication back and forth from a web server back to a client. It's also extremely flexible. What you're sending back and forth is typically JSON, and JSON is almost infinitely extensible. You can put just about any kind of content in it, and you can structure it however you like. It's extremely scalable. When you have fast, things usually scale a bit better. So you can have lots and lots of clients talking to the same web server. And it's uniform, which gives you an advantage if you want to be able to develop from multiple client platforms. So if you have a REST service, then you can write a native iOS app, you can write a web page, you can write a Windows app, you can write an Android app, all of which can talk to that REST service. It's also a good way for servers to talk to each other. Now, lots of other people have talked about this before. I know a few of them. Some of my fellow IBM champions, Eric McCormick, for example, has wrote a series recently about his use of REST. And as far as I know, none of these people are actually branching off of DDS. So why would you want to do DDS to implement your REST service? The first reason is because it does follow a standard. It follows the Apache Wink project. And so all of the structure of how you build that service is based on an open standard. It's not some proprietary IBM stuff. And the other big reason is that DDS already understands your Domino context, so you don't have to figure out how to do things like what's the user's identity, who they logged in as, how do I find out what database they're trying to access, and that sort of thing. That context already exists within DDS, and you can access it statically, and it makes it very easy to work with. So let's look at a few examples of DDS itself. This is just a simple example of a GET. So if you made a request from a browser or a mobile device to a URL for your server and requested the path API/data, it's going to come back with a JSON list of all of the databases that are available on that server. All right, so we have a little snippet here of some examples of them. And you see it gives you the href that gets you to the details of what's available within that particular application. So another example might be if we want to retrieve data from a particular document in a particular database. So you see now we have a little more sophistication in the URL. We request the server and then the database path /API/data/document/UNID, and this is telling the entire DDS structure that what we're going to be looking for is a document with a particular UNID in a specific database, and then we give it the UNID as part of the URL route. Okay? And then it comes back with the data set from that document. So here's an example. Again, it's just simple JSON, and we see all the metadata fields, and we see some of the hidden fields that are standard on all documents, and then details like first name, last name, a number field, and so forth. Of course, it's also important to be able to write stuff back to the server, and you do that using an HTTP method called put. And again, you're sending a put to a specific document UNID in a specific database, right? Only this time, when you're putting that back to the server, when you're sending that request back to the server, the content that you're sending is itself some JSON. So we're saying, well, this is a content type JSON. Don't worry about the method override thing. That's a little nuance. It's not really that important for now. Will be someday. And then all the details on the fields that we want to send back, right? So first name, last name, email, etc. So why would you need to extend that, right? You can read and write and even delete documents, and you can work with views within the DDS API. You can get access to everything you need. So That's not really any different than what you work with when you use LotusScript or Java APIs. So why would you need anything more? Well, there's a few reasons why. So the first thing is that when you request something from DDS, like a document, you're always going to get all the document contents, right? So you can't just say, well, I want to get this business card. I want to display a business card for this user with their directory information. So let me get their first name, last name, email address, and cell phone number. No, sorry, if you're requesting it out of the directory, you're going to get all the contents that exist in their person document, including public keys and password histories and just everything that's in there that you're authorized to read. So that's kind of a pain. Another shortcoming is that there's no built-in authentication facility. You can't just request a URL and provide it, say, parameters or something like that in order to establish a session and get a cookie so that you can be authorized moving forward. So that's a bit of a pain. It's a very raw data format. If we go back here and look, you can see that even things like the history of revisions is coming through as a pretty raw, structured sequence of strings. That's just, that they didn't even format each time and date according to ISO 8601. They did on the date below, but not in the dollar revisions. So it's a very raw format, so you have to do a lot more work on the client side to then figure out what you're going to do. And then, of course, the most important thing is that there's no validation of the data. So you're applying, if you have a put or a post where you're trying to write data back into a database, that data that gets written back is applied indiscriminately. So there's no sort of there's no way to establish any checks to make sure it's valid, that you're sending numbers to number fields, that you're sending dates to date fields, and so forth. So all of that validation then has to be done on the client end. And of course, as we know, it's easy to override what's happening on the client end. Now, to be fair, that's no different than the notes client, right? You have no real protection for what gets written back to documents when you're writing it with a notes client. It could be almost anything that is being written back by the client. You don't know whether the person wrote an agent to update it, whether they're using a form from a different database that they control. As long as they have the authorization, you don't truly have any control over that. So some of the ingredients that are necessary in order to extend DDS. The first is something called a REST service. That's where you're going to define overall how your REST service works, what its core URL is, what its name is going to be within the context of the Domino server. You define what are called REST resources. These are just Java objects. They don't inherit anything in particular, but they're Java objects that are the handlers for the requests that come in to your service. They use a specific set of annotations that are defined formerly by Sun, now by Oracle, in the JavaX namespace. You'll also need to understand something called a JSON object that's part of the IBM Commons. You'll need to get familiar with the context info, which is a static utility in order to understand what the context of your Domino application is. And if you want to do some more advanced stuff, you'll need to get to know the JSON writer from the IBM Commons. So a little more detail on the REST service itself. When you create your own REST service, you really just need to define two things: classes and singletons. And these are just things you're just registering a way to say when requests come in, these are the classes or these are the objects that you use to handle them, right? And you can find some excellent examples online. I'll pull this one up real quick, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, but this is the calendar service example from IBM, and you can see here it has a get classes, and it's just registering a list of all of the resource classes that it's going to use to service requests as they come in. Okay, so these are just other class files that exist within the same project. And then, of course, the other thing you need is an extension point in your plugin XML so that you can specify that you want this thing to ultimately be registered as a REST service. It's very, very simple, right? You just specify what class is the actual REST service. You give it a name, which you're going to use to then later control enabling it and disabling it on the server, and then the path, which is going to be the place where it appears within the API itself. So that would be, within the URL. So that would match up to what appears in this part of the URL right here. So it says API data, and the calendar service, you say API/calendar, and that's defined by having this attribute in the plugin XML. Okay. So an actual REST resource. This is just a POJO that you build based on annotations. You have to annotate the class itself at the top. By the way, if any of you don't know how to use Java annotations, that's okay, but you really should learn. They're very important, they're very useful, and you can do lots of cool stuff with them. So in this case, you have to define the path at the top of the class to indicate what the URL that this particular class is going to handle will be. And then you define methods within it using @get, @post, @put, and @delete, so that you're defining specific handlers within those methods to say this is what I want to do when I get these kinds of requests coming in from clients. And then there's specific annotations you can use on arguments that will automatically cause those arguments to come out of the request that came through in the first place. So context, header parameter, path parameter, and query param. So you can see an example down here at the bottom. I've given you links to two examples. One is is a get example for a calendar notice resource, and one is a post example. These will be also linkable in the PDF that comes with that comes after the webinar, by the way. But here's a little snippet, so you can see the use of this @path that's in the calendar notices, plus an additional static parameter, and then action. And then in this case, there's a controller for a put action, and you can see we've got @header param content type, @path param notice, @query param URL param, right? So these are all things that this particular method is going to be fed automatically by the REST service engine that will be contained in the request, right? So you don't have to figure out how to do all this parsing stuff yourself out of the URL. That's all built into the REST service itself. That all comes from Apache Link. Okay, once you have one of those resources where you define what's going to happen when a particular kind of request comes in, you then have to say, well, how am I going to turn whatever it is I've got into something that's going to produce JSON so I can send the JSON back? And you do that using JSON adapters. They implement something defined within IBM called a JSON object, and that has three key properties. There's get JSON properties, which is just get me a list of all the properties that are known. There's get JSON property, where you're looking for a specific property, and put JSON property, where you're receiving one and you're gonna post it back. And you can think of this, it's very similar to saying for a document, if you were going to do this with a document, you would say document.getFields, right? You get all the fields off the document, and then you would iterate over them and do get item value with each field name that you found within the document itself, right? It's that simple. And then if you were doing puts, you would do a replace item value, right? So it's very, very simple. And there's another example here. Right, so this is an alarm adapter. It's pulling an alarm out of a user's calendar and then turning it into a JSON object. And so get JSON properties just reads a set of properties that come right off that calendar. So these are all statically defined in this case. And depending on which property you want to get, it retrieves the value out of that particular alarm. Okay, it's very straightforward stuff. Adapter patterns are pretty well established within the Java world, and they're pretty easy to work with. Okay. You'll also need to understand a bit about the JSON writer. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I missed a slide. I knew I missed a slide. Context info. It's just a static class. It's much like notes context in XPages. It's just where you have your utilities to get the context of what's going on with the user. So in this case, the two key methods are get user session and get user database. That's where you'll have to go to understand the context of what's being requested and who's doing it. Okay? So you get that user session, and of course that gives you access to the complete API, and you can do anything you want in Java land. It's all ones and zeros from there. And then lastly, the last ingredient that you may need for more advanced scenarios is a JSON writer. And that's where you want to control the specific output that comes from specific Java objects that may not already be defined in IBM's version. And you do that by overriding a method called outObject. And I have an example here from the OpenNTF REST API. So in this case, we've just overridden outObject, and we're just saying if the object that's coming through is of a particular type, we want to create our adapters and then output those adapters. Right? It's really straightforward stuff. Just a couple of different conditions, because IBM's API, of course, doesn't know what to do with an edge frame or a vertex frame. Doesn't even know what to do with a class, because sometimes I output classes, and that's kind of useful. Okay, and that concludes what I wanted to talk to you about today. You can find more details about DDS itself at this URL, which is part of IBM's. I just noticed it actually has the lotus.com address. That's really funny. But it's part of IBM's tech library, and that has all the details for how to enable the Domino data service in the first place, and then how to work with it and how to use its URLs. And once you understand that, then understanding how to roll your own gets a lot simpler. All right, and I think with that, we'll move on to our questions.
Okay, hopefully you're seeing the screen about asking questions. So again, ask your questions in the questions pane. And we're going to get to your questions. And while people are putting in their questions, just some upcoming events. If you're in the Atlanta area, there's an Atlanta user group. Actually, I think Peter's presenting at that, right, Nathan?
I'm actually not sure, but he usually does, so he probably is, yeah.
Yeah. So Peter is Nathan's partner in Red Pill, and then there's also a Granite user group meeting in Chicago, and then of course we got the big conferences with Connect coming up, and then over in Europe we get a couple of conferences next year if you're making travel plans. So Paul, do we have some questions queued up?
Hey. Howard, you wouldn't have had any way of knowing this, but that's actually not my correct Twitter handle. My Twitter handle it's @NTF, which I think would be pretty easy for anybody on this call to remember.
Yes. Okay. I'll fix that before we send the slides out.
Thanks.
Yeah, I did a Google search and I guess it failed me.
Let me do a quick sound check. Can you hear me, Howard?
Yeah.
Okay, so I do have a question. I have a question from Meland. Does the document data source have to be passed as a custom property to a custom control, or can you update the data source defined on the main X page without passing it as a property? Anyone want that?
I think it's a question for Mike, isn't it?
Yeah, Mike, I think that's kind of along your topic there on custom properties.
Maybe Mike has audio issues. We're not hearing him. Yeah, one thing I'll point out is that Mike didn't mention it, but you can pass in a document data source, in other words, the document object, into as a property in the custom control, which can be very helpful when you're designing custom controls and you don't want to hard code in the name of the data source. Mike, are you with us? I think Mike's audio just went gray, so that's not a good sign. So might be back with us. Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? As the commercial says. Sorry, I was on the phone. All right, I was on the phone, and I know I was unmuted, but in terms of the properties, you could pass in any a lot of different ways. Any way that you could compute it, you could pass it in. Now, the one on the custom control, that is a lot more. That seemed to have a lot more options. I only saw on the page itself, the X page. I only saw that you could pass in some kind of string. The value seemed to end up to be a string, but that might not be true. It seems like I hate to say for sure without testing it.
There is an option to pass in the XSP document, but it's best to if you Google that. I think they have. I've seen. I know people have written up the details.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that the custom control can affect a data source bound above it, so you don't have to pass it in as a property. You can if you want to, and there's reasons you might want to do that. But if you have something above it in the tree, the custom control should be able to see that and affect the data on that.
Correct. Yeah, but it won't go the other way. You can't. You can't define a data source on the custom control and access it from the calling X page or
Correct.
the parent X page.
Yeah, it's top down.
Top down. Okay, let's go on to a question from Sebastian. Hopefully I'm going to get this right. It's kind of long. So Sebastian has a type ahead field, and he has an on-change event. And so the user can click a value from the drop-down list and open up a page. But when he does that, then the on-change event runs, which does a partial refresh, so that the on-click event doesn't run. So he wants to know, how can he have a type ahead field so the user can click an item and go to the selected page and keep the button's on-click event working without having to wait for the on-change refresh to complete? So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's making sense to me. I mean, the click and on change are usually like independent, so I'm not quite sure why you would use both there. But I don't do a lot in the client side world like that. I mean, I've done a lot with the on change. You still get type ahead and on change, and then as you tab out or you hit enter, the change gets recognized from the browser, and then it triggers that partial refresh. So I don't know if I've ever tried to marry that up with an on-click event too.
Yeah, and it sounds like then he also has a button. So Sebastian, if you want to clarify, we'll maybe come back to you if we got time. Okay, Paul, do you have a?
Yeah, I have a question from Jen. In terms of performance, is it better to pass many properties for each custom control, or to pass, for instance, a Java object and then have the object get those properties within the code?
I would not expect that to make a difference in performance.
I would agree.
That's a nuance that is just well beyond what's actually going to impact the behavior of your application.
I think what does help the performance is to make sure that you only do your lookups once. So rather than if you've got code that's doing, you don't want to do like 5 dB lookups, through server-side JavaScript and for each field or so. If you can get all it in one lookup and then pass that back or access that as as a predefined group, that's where you get your performance gain. I've passed objects to a custom control, and I've had a custom control just hard-coded a reference to one of my controller objects. So, like as Nathan says, that's just a nuance. Just try to look up to the data as few times as possible.
Howard, do you have a question, or did you want me to continue?
Yeah, we have a question for Nathan. So from Ivana, wants to know, why is REST faster if I have managed beans that return JSON for repeat is, I don't know if you're saying, is REST still faster, or making a comment that it is, but do you have any comparisons you want to do, Nathan, on performance between using REST versus just returning a JSON list of objects?
Sure. I will heartily agree that if you have a control on an X page and a repeat that produces JSON output, that's probably going to be pretty fast. I would expect an actual REST service to be faster and more scalable because you're bypassing stuff like the XPages lifecycle, right? You get, there's so much less context going on because even when you're outputting JSON from an XPage or a custom control, you're still talking about having to go through the entire markup cycle, the markup generation cycle. Whereas the REST service, all it does is say, make me a Java string writer, and then start outputting characters. It's as bare bones as you can get. So there's so much less context structure, or the context stuff going on, and I would really expect it to outperform. You could do a fairly easy test, right? Because you've got DDS already. So if you really think that your XPages-based markup generation would be faster, or at least not so much slower, you can compare. Just write an XPage that generates the same thing as the DDS service, and enable the DDS service, and make 2 different requests, and compare the wall time.
Okay, and Nathan, kind of following along the same line, Emilio asked, does the extended DDS classes run in the JSF lifecycle, or are they more like servlets?
The REST service is a servlet, so IBM's infrastructure for that is a separate servlet. So you're running in the same JVM, but you're not running in the same servlet. And I know that probably sounds like a nuance to a lot of people, but it's a fairly substantial difference. So you have access to some of the same classes, and you're in the same memory space, but you have a lot less baggage going on around it.
Okay, and while we're talking about REST, one more. Are there any good examples of, Chris wanted to know, of XPages pulling an external REST service, in other words, not Domino, which probably doesn't matter, but I guess more on the consuming side, in terms of examples consuming REST services?
It'll be consumed by client side, I think, so you could use almost any example out there. You don't really have that wouldn't be a server side consumption, I don't think, would it?
You can. I have examples of that where you have the server itself is making the request, the REST call to retrieve some data set for what it's going to display to the user. At that point, XPages is acting like a proxy. There are reasons to do that on occasion. If you were building a front end and integrating information that was coming off of, I don't know, Office Delve or something, then you may want to have your by the way, one of the presenters is typing, and they're not muted, or one of the organizers. And I hear a lot of clicking. So you might have some external data source where you want to get the information out, but then present it within the context of your X page. Now, that being said, it would very much be preferable in terms of architecture to have the client making the other REST call, and just having something on your XPages framework expecting that call to then be made and adjust the page accordingly. But that even assumes that the client has access to that REST service. It might be inside a firewall. It might be that client wouldn't have credentials on that service. I mean, there's all kinds of things that it might be.
Here's the cool thing about the REST services to me. Now, I'm a huge fan of repeat controls. I love repeat controls. But if you can get your data through a JSON REST service, then where you would normally use a repeat control, especially if it's a table, you could use one of these grids that are out there, these client-side grids. So we've been playing with this jQuery table tools or jQuery whatever it's called.
jQuery data tables.
Data tables. Thank you, Mike. And what you get things when you do that. So you put the grid on there. It uses the JSON. So you're just setting the JSON down. Now it can kind of encapsulate a repeat control, but now you're sending extra markup that you don't need. And then when you turn this thing on, what do you get? Well, each column is now sortable, and it gives you buttons like to export to Excel and export to PDF. and stuff like that. So I haven't mastered it yet, otherwise it'd be on Notes 9, but that is a big reason to try to do that. So if you're doing a repeat control of a table lookup kind of thing, if you do the JSON and you do one of these grid things, you're going to start getting a lot for free, and your users like that stuff.
Yeah, we don't even really build in XPages anymore at my company. We use Polymer components for the front end, and everything is REST APIs. That's why I've been doing so much work in this space lately. So we're completely API driven, and everything that's happening on the server is REST APIs. And then the stuff that we're developing on the client end, Keith Strickland, my colleague, doesn't even use Designer. He's just using the best of breed local HTML and JavaScript development tools and writing stuff in Polymer, and the speed at which he can produce new screens and test them and deploy them is like orders of magnitude better than what was going on with Designer and XPages, really.